All right, welcome back to the Braking Zone. Summer break is over. We just watched the race in Spielberg, the prettiest, most boring racetrack in probably the absolute prettiest setting imaginable. And what did you think of the race?
I think that's true. I think Austria, that area of Austria is stunning. The scenery views are always some of the best ones. The racetrack is a little boring. It does have some dramatic sections. The GP race, I mentioned when we were watching it, it looks like the riders were pushing hard in every corner because there's so few corners that you've got to scratch and claw for every tenth of a second.
It's 11 turns in barely 2 miles, from what I understand. So it's a very point and shoot. It's a very Formula One racetrack. Did who win that you thought was going to win? That is the most awful phrase question.
Am I surprised that Marc Marquez won a sixth straight race? No.
It's like they made all this drama about he's never won here. Pecco won the last 3 years in a row.
I think when you watch the race, he looked like he just had it in control the whole time. I was thrilled to see Bez giving him kind of a run in the beginning, at least. And Mark, even in the interview later, said, hey, in the first half when I tried to make a push to pass and it was too risky, which has to be a compliment to Bez that you're riding fast enough that even trying to pass you was risky, right? So he didn't ultimately end up winning, but at least he was pushing Mark. So I think it's a great sign for Aprilia. It's a terrible sign for Bagnaia because I was really hoping that the summer break for Bagnaia was going to be kind of a reset mentally for him. And he said all the right things in the interviews. I went back and I looked at my old race footage and I know I can win. I want to be that guy again. And he, again, just was kind of embarrassingly easy to pass by everybody and just looked sort of weak and powerless in the race, which is unfortunate.
Well, and he had bad luck in the sprint as well.
Yeah.
Do we know what that was?
The spin off the line?
No, not the spin off the line. He retired early because the bike was doing something.
Who knows? I never heard it, and we probably never will.
Yeah.
Especially in GP, they're fairly...
Even though we did get a dramatic motorcycle explosion in this race, another a Ducati blew up.
Yeah, and I think that I'm surprised we don't get more failures because of the engine limitations and what they produce out of these engines.
300 horsepower or whatever they're putting out.
It's pretty bonkers to think about what they get out of these things for how many miles they have to go, or kilometers, I should say. But they don't blow up that often. You think they blow up a lot more.
Right. I think the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of Aprilia failures and a couple of Ducati failures. And maybe it's because the Yamaha and Honda aren't producing enough horsepower to hurt themselves.
Yeah, and that's sadly true. I was impressed by the KTM seems to have come out with a couple of new things after the summer break, which was great to see. And even Acosta mentioned after the race that he was able to do some things with this bike that he couldn't before. He didn't quite finish where he wanted. He made some mistakes on track.
Yeah, but he was right up there at the front for a good portion of the race.
And he looked great all weekend. In qualifying, he looked good. In sprint, he looked good. It's a great sign for the bike's competitiveness. Now, you'd have to say that this is probably where the KTM is usually going to be the strongest.
The home track.
And it's a horsepower track, and the KTM seems to have that covered.
From what I understand, KTM still has the top speed record. It's, the fastest, strongest engine.
Yep. But I think when Acosta was up front fighting, Bastianini looked great.
He was super aggressive. Even, he didn't talk a whole lot about Binder, but he was also really consistent. The KTMs were all pretty close together riding. So I think that speaks well that the bikes... The two big takeaways I had from the race was, number one, I like Bez to begin with. He's impressed me this year. And I still think based on his performance today, we may have been underestimating Bez.
Yep.
He's really showing his chops. And then the other thought that Mrs. Can Chaser brought up, that last year, the two top riders of last year seemed to be having nothing but bad luck this year. And it's really interesting how the whole face of the series changed from one year to the next. Both of them are having just terrible, terrible luck. I'm so glad that, as far as we know, Martin did not get hurt. He looked like he was laying there in the gravel, looked hurt, sat there on the wall with medical tending to him, looked hurt. And then you see him in the pit, he looked fine, which was good.
Yeah, and I think the slow get up was more an emotional one and frustration than it was a physical injury. To be fair, watching the race, I thought Martin looked like he was overriding almost the entire race.
Yeah, and he also looked like he got mugged a couple times, some pretty mean block passes, and he looked like he gave in soon. Like it looked to me he was unwilling to go elbow to elbow because he's still nursing these injuries or doesn't want to get re-injured.
Yeah, to my eye when I watched him, he looked kind of sloppy, like he's really just not quite back up to race speed mentally. And this is a track, like I mentioned earlier, there's so few corners, and getting into the corner right and getting out of the corner right makes such a difference that if you're just a little bit off, if you're a little late on the brakes or a little early on the brakes, you can totally ruin the corner or make yourself an easy target for passes. And I think that's what was happening to Martin. Was he was just that little bit inconsistent. And it's surprising. Like, that's to be expected after coming back from basically not riding a GP bike and racing significantly for half the year. He was just going to struggle with the mental speed of what you have to do on these things.
A lot of running wide in the corner at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Where there was that horrible crash years and years ago.
Yeah. So I think what we saw was he's just really not quite up to speed. I'm not as concerned about that. I think that's going to come back. But between the two, I'm more concerned with Bagnaia because I just don't know what the excuse is that he cannot seem to be competitive right now.
That he's disappeared.
He's nowhere.
Yeah. He qualified well.
Yep.
Got that terrible start in the sprint.
Yep.
And then went backwards.
Yep.
He got a pretty good start in the race and then proceeded to go backwards.
Yeah. So the end result is the race we all thought it was. Marquez 6 wins in a row. The championship I think is pretty much done and dusted. I think we also
that 400 points,
which is just a staggering total in general. But
there's a lot of talk online. How many more races before he has the championship locked down? We have 10 races left.
Mm-hmm.
Can he get I think they're saying within 3 more races, he would have the title locked down.
Yeah, I saw a report from Moto Matters. David Emmett at Moto Matters does a great job, but he loves to play spreadsheets and do math. He did an analysis of when he thinks Marquez could start winning, and it was as soon as Misano.
Oh my God.
Very soon.
At Rossi's home track.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of Rossi, did you watch the pregame show? I always watch the pregame show, and there was Stoner was there, and Stoner and Rossi had a nice little moment. They embraced and they talked they were sitting there chatting for quite a while, and they had a fairly contentious battle. And I don't know if there's still bad blood there, but at least in front of the cameras, they had a nice little chat.
Their battles seem to be very on track, not very off track.
No, that's good to hear.
They never.
There was always the famous scene, though, right? You remember this, where Rossi punted Stoner. Stoner goes into the garage and said,
In Jerez,
yeah, your ambition outweighed your talent, that's something to say to Valentino Rossi. So you always wonder what kind of tension is between those two.
And I think I believe that was Rossi's first year on the Ducati, which was not a good bike. And he just made a very foolish pass and, check out. But I think their disagreements were on track disagreements. There was the Laguna Pass, which I would still contend probably shouldn't have been allowed. You don't just get to go off track and cut a corner to make a pass.
Yeah, but
it was exciting and I enjoyed it. But their fighting was never felt personal and very much felt on track racing. Whereas I don't feel that we're going to, I hope we do someday, but I don't think we're going to get to see that same reaction with him and Marquez ever. Because theirs is much more personal.
Oh, I would agree. It felt personal. But I would also say, I'm a huge Stoner fanboy. Had Stoner not got sick, I still think Stoner may have been probably one of the more talented than Rossi and Marquez. Because what he was riding, the way he rode, his analytical nature, the way he problem solved his way through things is just a tragedy that that he got sick and we lost him. And so every time he shows up and he says anything, I listen. I want to hear what Stoner has to say about everything. And he's so opinionated and he's bold. He'll say whatever comes to his mind. And I love that about the guy.
I think probably the strongest argument for Stoner's talent is actually Danny Pedrosa, because he got to ride with Stoner as a teammate as well as with Marquez as a teammate. And even he would say, in terms of talent, nobody was better than Stoner.
Really?
In terms of a racer, Marquez is the better racer.
Oh, he has an incredible racer.
He puts all the other pieces together. But in terms of raw riding talent, he said, we would all watch Stoner do stuff and you look at the data and you're like, that's not possible for any of us.
There's a Gypsy Tales podcast with Casey Stoner, and it's about 2 hours long, and it's kind of unfortunate. The Gypsy Tales guy, he talks about golfing more than he talks about MotoGP. But if you watch that whole podcast and you pull out where Casey starts talking about MotoGP and the way he was riding and the way he solved problems, it's absolutely mind-blowing the way he approached riding motorcycle. So I like the way you compared it, that Marquez probably has better racecraft. I think he always makes the right decision. The rain's coming or whatever. But as far as riding talent, I think that's a nice way to differentiate two of their great strengths.
One of the other things that came out of this weekend, one of the things that didn't come out of this weekend was we still have no news on rider contracts for next year.
Right.
Which has got to be getting pretty frustrating for especially the two Yamaha boys because even Miller mentioned, like, my options are drying up because these other options that were on the table are now getting filled. I'm waiting, Yamaha. Let's make a decision.
Yeah. And she had a rough weekend.
Well, all the Yamahas had a rough weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, in the GP, I think halfway through, they were the bottom 4 positions were Yamahas, the bottom 4. And it's like, as a factory, that is the most embarrassing thing. So in general, they did terrible. Yeah, they had an engine blow up. It caused crashes for their other riders. Just an all around totally terrible weekend for Yamaha.
I was really hoping we would see the V4. We haven't seen the V4 yet. And maybe we won't until next year. I
don't know what the rules are exactly for when they can pull that out for testing for maybe even a wild card. I'm sure at this point they're so lost in the woods that all the other manufacturers would just say, let them do whatever they want. We don't even care. They're so far in the back. It's unfortunate and kind of embarrassing. But one of the things that did come out of this weekend was a slight ECU update.
Yeah, I was going to talk to you about this. I'm not sure I understand what exactly changed. They turned on a new feature in the ECU. I don't understand what it does.
So all of the MotoGP bikes run a spec ECU. Now, they all have different engines, obviously, but they all run a spec ECU, so they get access to the same software, the same controls. Now, they have to set it up for themselves, but it's the spec ECU. They turned on a new feature in the spec ECU for this weekend for stability control. Now, a lot of the teams have been testing it prior, so it wasn't just a, hey, brand new feature. In theory, they should have had enough time to plan for it and figure out how to use it. The question, though, is what the heck is stability control, right? So the MotoGP bikes have traction control already. And what traction control is doing is it's measuring the speed of the two wheels and looking at the difference in speed. And if it sees that the rear is spinning at a higher rate than the front or significantly higher, it starts backing off torque to stop the spin. So traction control reduces torque based on wheel spin. Stability control, it also reduces torque. That's all it can do, is reduce torque to the rear wheel. It does it based on slide motion or yaw motion. So if you think about the bike, it has an IMU, inertial measurement unit. It's looking at how the bike is moving in space. So when it senses that the bike is leaned over and rather than tracking through a corner, it's sliding, either the rear sliding or both wheels are sliding to some extent through a corner, it measures that yaw motion. And now stability control can also reduce torque when it senses that as the input. The reason they did this is the argument is a safety reason. So there are times when riders create sort of catastrophic high sides that aren't just driven by rear wheel spin. It's by a huge slide that then suddenly grips and launches the rider. So the argument for stability control is a safety one. The argument against it is the argument against any electronic rider aids is that it takes a little more control out of the rider's hands. And this one in particular, the argument is that it's probably benefiting some manufacturers more than others.
Which manufacturers would it benefit more? So
my understanding from what I've read, and you're kind of reading the between the lines with this stuff, it seems like this really is intended to help Aprilia and Yamaha mostly. Which would make sense. Those two seem to be the bikes that are the most sort of corner speed driven bikes.
Yeah.
So they're probably the most susceptible to slides like this. So in theory, or the argument anyway, is that, hey, you're trying to like tweak the rules to bring one of the other manufacturers closer to Ducati specifically. So that's kind of the argument against stability control.
All right. So let's talk about stability control a little bit more, because ABS is not allowed in racing. And I'm a little surprised as to why, right? Because they do things like stability control because they say, well, this enhances safety. We've done a lot of things like for safety. But ABS is turned off. So and the stability control, how effective can it be where it doesn't get to use any type of ABS under a braking event? And why, let's talk about ABS on race bikes, because on a street bike, I absolutely love having it on a street bike. I really love having the IMU lean sensitive ABS on a street bike. Now, and I still ride in such a way that ABS will never, ever turn on, but I sure like that it's there. Yep. So what's the difference between racing and a street rider as far as this ABS thing?
So I believe the argument against ABS in racing is just one of competitiveness in terms of what are you seeing the riders actually do. So if we turn on ABS, now pretty much any rider can brake at the absolute limit for a corner entry. So now you've taken away the ability to make passes on entry because everyone is braking at the absolute maximum everywhere.
Now, Formula One had ABS for a little while.
Yep.
But they don't now.
And there's other car racing series that also have ABS. The problem, it kind of has the same issue where you're really taking away a lot of the opportunity for the driver, the rider to show their talent. And it becomes more an engineering exercise and less a riding competition. And that I think is in the vein of why they don't allow it for motorcycles. The upside of it for a street rider is obviously safety. If you get into a surprising situation or panic situation or bad road conditions, which happens all the time.
That to me is the biggest reason that ABS will help me if I miss something, right? The very first bike that I got ABS was probably 12, 15 years ago. And riding California, like China, Laurel grade, whatever, these janky little roads, it's shady, it's mossy, there's sometimes gravel, and just like slowing down into a downhill corner. And I watched the dashboard just start lighting up like crazy. I never felt anything in lever or whatever. And as I got into that corner, I saw that there was just like pea gravel and a stream of water across it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I loved that ABS was there. And now a lot of riders will say, well, as I'm just going to mash the brake everywhere I go and just let ABS sort it out. And let's talk about that. And that also kind of comes into what you're saying about racers just mashing the brake at the last second and let it sort it out. But also,
right. So your street bike, your production bike that you can go buy, it has ABS that is tuned for street tires on street conditions and roads. Your street bike's ABS is not tuned to deal with a racetrack with slick tires that are super grippy on really good asphalt. So you really would need to get the ABS for the race bikes would be tuned very differently, and it would intervene very differently to adjust because of that grip. But the mentality of we'll just mash the brake, that's the best braking situation that is ever going to happen. Maybe for the rider at that skill level, that's true. Let the ABS sorting it out is probably better than what you can do. The trade-off of that is if that's your mindset and that's the way you're going to go about riding, you're never going to develop much feel or skill for using the brakes. Because all the ABS can do is limit brake pressure. That's all it can do, right? It can pulse brake pressure, but at the end of the day, all it's doing is pulling back brake pressure. Okay. There is still so much more dynamic things happening on a motorcycle than in a car. In a car, if you look at race cars, the amount of travel that they have is minimal. You're not really getting a lot of pitch front and back. You do get weight transfer for sure, but you don't get nearly the amount of weight transfer that we get on a motorcycle. When was the last time you saw a race car do a stoppie into a corner, right? It doesn't happen. On motorcycles, though, we get so much extra grip from the weight transfer because remember, friction force isn't just how grippy or how good is the rubber and the road. That is just friction coefficient. Friction force is friction coefficient times the normal force being effectively the opposite of how much load you push into the tire. So if I have a tire that is rolling along smoothly at 80 miles an hour with no extra load on it other than the weight of the vehicle, and then I just lock the brake, instantaneously pull the brake lever as hard as I can and lock it, ABS will probably save me from a massive slide, but I still have to let the weight transfer onto it. And the ABS will start intervening even before the weight transfers. So it'll slow down my weight transfer to some extent. If instead you rode like you should ride and slowly and progressively loaded the front, so it actually got weight into it before you braked,
And before you build a lot of pressure.
yeah, built up pressure to the maximum, you're going to get to stop faster. Okay. Now, better still, as we talked about last week with the rear brake, applying the rear brake a little bit early to squat the rear end down. All of these sort of physics things still come into play even when you have ABS. So as a street rider, if you have ABS, that's a great backup in case something goes wrong. But I do not think it's the right attitude to just say, oh, well, I'm just going to mash the brakes whenever I want and let the computer sort it out. Because it isn't always going to sort it out perfectly. And you are giving up a lot of control and ways that you could make the braking better.
Right. So if you think about it, in simplest terms, and we say this in our videos all the time, the grip comes from weight, right? We load the tire before we work the tire. There's the whole, pressure, not our tire pressure, not much how much air is in the tire, but how much we're putting it into it. You get keying. The rubber is actually being deformed into the road surface. So you're actually getting, not only is the contact patch growing, we're actually getting more physical contact as we go through. So the ABS would also be able to be more effective and more precise working with a loaded tire versus an underloaded tire, right? And then you start thinking about, or what we see at the racetrack, right? That these riders that come in with the trust the tech mentality, right? And we see it with, ABS and traction control, that they are abrupt with all of their controls and they let the bike sort it out. And to a certain extent, they go really fast with not a whole lot of finesse until they get to a point where the systems are so overwhelmed, they are so far beyond what the physics and the tire is capable of. Then we see very violent crashes, right? And so it seems to me you would want to still build, well, this is what I advocate for, build the right technique and leverage the benefits of a technology, not just rely on them blindly. Because there's also a situation on my older Multistrada, I didn't realize it, but something had clipped the ABS line, right? And so like going into a corner, suddenly there was no ABS. And if my only way of riding is just trust the tech, and suddenly that tech isn't there, now what?
I think the other thing too is if you ride in such a way that you are solely dependent on the technology to produce the riding that the inputs that you need, or rather the outputs, I guess, you're going to plateau as a rider very, very quickly, right? If I told you, hey, Dave, never think about loading brake pressure, just mash it as hard as you can, you are going to get to the ceiling of what the ABS will let you do quickly. And you'll feel like, oh, look how quickly I progressed. But how are you ever going to get beyond that? If all you know is to just mash it on the brakes or on the throttle and just say, hey, I'll let the TC sort it out. You're basically saying, hey, my limit as a rider, whether it's on the track or on the street or what have you, it is the limit of the technology. And so you're never really going to get to progress beyond that. And then again, if you're in a situation where you don't have those things available to you, or they're not as good as they were for some reason, then what do? You're kind of left out there. So I think in terms of, I mean, everyone can buy a bike and do whatever the heck they want to do. If you want to just smash the brakes and smash the throttle and just let the tech sort it out for you, Godspeed. It doesn't seem like a very enjoyable way to ride. But if you're really concerned with getting better and improving your skill as a rider, trying to figure out how to be less dependent on those things and make controlled inputs that don't rely on those things is I believe, a much safer, much more long-term way to ride, but also a much more enjoyable way to ride, right? Do you get on a bike because it does everything for you? Or do you get on a bike because, no, I'm in charge. I get to ride. This is what I want to do, So I don't know. I can't say that I really understand the personality that just wants to rely on technology all the time. But
let's talk about the limits of technology, because I love this story that you and I have the same bike, right? I believe they're even the same year. Like there's not a whole lot different between our two bikes. And I was having a suspension problem. You hopped on my bike. I think we even had the same tires on them. Our suspension settings are very similar. However, I had not turned ABS on. ABS was still set to the lowest level on my bike, and you didn't know that. What happened?
So we were at the racetrack. We were on slick tires. They were on warmers. There were plenty of grip. I know this track. I've done a zillion laps around this track. I know my way around. I was in a track day session, one of the fast group track day session, and had done a few laps and was starting to build a little. I didn't want to just go flat out on your bike immediately. But after about 2 or 3 laps, I was feeling pretty comfortable with it. And I went to the brakes in one of our hairpin corners after a long straight. So this is 4th or 5th gear down to 2nd. So it's a pretty hard braking zone. I went to the brakes like I normally would, on slick tires, loaded the front, and then all of a sudden the ABS kicks on. And it will not let me slow down any harder than the ABS says I'm allowed to slow down. And I basically went into the corner at some sort of capped amount of brake pressure that I was allowed to apply, squeezing harder and harder, but it wouldn't make a difference. It didn't change anything. And careened off into, like, I missed the apex entirely. I didn't go into the dirt, but I definitely missed the corner and went onto the little paved apron because the ABS basically said, hey, nope, you're at the limit. You're going to start locking the front. You're going to crash. I was nowhere near the actual limit of those tires or that track in those conditions. But that's a perfect example of that. ABS really was not tuned to deal with what kind of grip was available at the track. And I definitely was not ready for it to engage and take that brake pressure away from me.
Well, and we've probably all been in situations in a car or on a motorcycle where you're in gravel and you go to the brakes, ABS kicks on really early. And this is a true story. This happened to a friend of mine. I watched it happen. We were all pulled over in this little gravel thing, and he pulled in to stop, and he wasn't going that quick, but the ABS was like, nope, nope, nope. And the ABS basically intervened, and it was a pull out with a drop off. Yep. And he bailed off. The bike would not stop. He had to jump off the bike. The bike went off the edge, and he sat there, and we had to drag his bike up out of the ditch. Because ABS, again, it was too intrusive. Yep. And so I love ABS. And we should talk about the lean sensitive ABS, because I'm not as familiar with that, because I still try to ride without it. But there are situations where the technology isn't necessarily going to be in your best interest, and you should know how to operate a motorcycle properly. Yep. Not rely solely.
And I think the biggest thing with all of these technologies is you have to have a really, really solid understanding of what they actually do or can do, right? If you think about traction control, all traction control can do is take away torque from the rear tire. That's all it can do. It doesn't give you more grip. It doesn't find more traction. It just takes away torque going to the rear to stop a spin or control a spin. The same thing with ABS. ABS doesn't somehow make the front tire grippier. All it does is it takes away some brake pressure or pulses the brake in order to try to help it find traction again if it's starting to lose traction. That's all these inputs can do, is they can always pull back stuff. They can never add more or magically create more grip or more turning or more anything. So just keep in mind what they're actually capable of. With the IMU one, again, the idea is it's understanding the lean angle of the bike. And as the bike is more leaned, it knows the bike is not upright. My assumption is it's going to start intervening ABS sooner, because a front lock or maybe not a full lock. I think a lot of times when we say the front tire is locking, we think it's literally locked solid, like it's not rotating at all. Really, all we're saying is it's spinning enough slower than the rear that it starts to slide, right? On a leaning, when you're leaned, the IMU knows that, and it's going to start intervening sooner with the pulsing of the brake or pulling out pressure, because it knows, hey, a little bit of a lock here is a much bigger deal than if he's upright or rider's upright, because it's going to immediately start pushing the front and understeering and possibly tuck the front tire. The same issue happens on the race bike. I had to have the ECU retuned slightly because the IMU would do the same thing with traction control, basically. It would say, hey, you're at 45 degrees, not 0. I'm not going to give you as much torque as you're asking for. And as I bring it back up from 45 to 40 and so forth, in theory, it should give me more torque as I come back to upright. The problem is it would do that almost incrementally or not smoothly. So I would be leaned in a corner asking for 60% torque, let's say. And it's like, no, you get 30 right here. But I know the bike could handle 40. So I ask for a little more and ask for a little more, and I still don't get more until I finally start taking away lean angle.
So you get to like the next 10-degree increment.
And then I get to another increment and it goes, oh, you can handle more. And now it reads the input I'm giving it again. We would refer to this now in terms of computers. This is your torque request. This is not your throttle, right? I'm requesting more torque. But all of a sudden I would get a little bit less lean angle, and then it would say, oh, you can have more power. And it would suddenly give me more power to the point where I would be kind of violently lifting the front wheel, leaned over, coming out of corners. It was safer for me in that scenario to get the ECU retuned to have much less intervention on the TC and let me just sort it out and handle it. So that's it. Now on a street bike, would I want more intervention? Almost certainly, right? I don't have the same grip and conditions, but that's just an example of like the difference between these types of systems in those applications.
Well, when we think about it, we see this at the track all the time. Kid goes out on ice cold tires and he just like whacks the throttle and he high sides and he comes in, he goes, I don't understand. I had traction control turned on, right? And again, it's not going to see a lateral slide. It sees the rotation of the wheel. Mm-hmm. If you're drifting it, unless you have a more advanced IMU apparently, and IMUs are relatively new on motorcycles, and I think they're only going to be improving from here.
Yeah, and that's, there's conditions where we refer to as like a momentum slide. And that happens a lot of times at the racetrack or on the street where it isn't because the rear is being, spun faster than the front. It's literally, you're at the limit of adhesion. The tires are just not gripping anymore and they start to slide. And at that point, there is no intervention to do, right? I can't magically stop the thing. I can give it less torque, but if you're off throttle anyway, you aren't asking for torque. So like there are conditions where understanding the physics and what the tires are capable of and your skill still does make the difference, and the computer can't save you. So
yeah, because I guess on one side, and this is really one thing I love about how motorcycles have improved, is for the majority of riders, the tire is more capable than we realize. Mm-hmm. We talked last week about, more front tire slides are caused from being underloaded, not overloaded. There's so many situations where, just like turn your head and lean more.
Right.
It'll probably be just fine. Right. But there's also like, we can get lazy and complacent and push that to the other end of the spectrum. And again, like to the point we made earlier, that's where some of the most violent crashes we see on the racetrack now are the people who just trust the tech blindly. And then it's really out of sorts by the time you've overwhelmed all these amazing rider aids that we have available to us now.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to circle back to MotoGP, how this And maybe we should talk about this too, how this stability control works, because we now have these mass dampers in the tail section. And mass dampers aren't talked about a lot in the tail section. And I wonder if these two things are going to work together or how that's going to play out, because that's interesting to me.
So my understanding of the mass damper is it is intended to...
Should we explain what a mass damper is really quickly for those who may not know?
Yeah, so in its simplest terms, if you take a mass of some kind and you put it between springs or some sort of suspended contraption, and these get really wild sometimes, the designs they come up with. The idea is as you deliver an input to it, the mass damper, the mass, is going to react differently than the solid structure. So take your motorcycle, for example. Think about the subframe. If I all of a sudden get a hit or an oscillation, the subframe is going to react quickly based on just what the suspension and tire can absorb. The frame's going to take the rest of it. That mass damper is sprung, typically, and it is going to have a different rate of reaction to whatever it is. The idea with it is the fact that it is reacting at a different frequency, a different speed, is going to cancel out some of the other motions that are happening. So where this gets used in motorsport typically is if you get to a point where you are experiencing chatter, or which is a weird phenomenon. It's
When you have too much grit.
and it's very difficult to describe how it comes about sometimes and what causes it. But in simple terms, imagine your rear tire has so much grip that it isn't able to just spin smoothly, right? We picture tires like dirt track riders or flat track riders, where once it breaks traction, it's just this nice, gentle glide smooth through the corner. If you have a really grippy tire and really grippy surface, it doesn't just gently slide and drift through the corner. It grips, slips, grips, slips, grips, slips. And that almost creates this shudder because it happens at such a high frequency that it'll create this pulsing shudder into the motorcycle itself. And that can happen at the front or the rear, okay? Now, when that happens, effectively the rear tire grips, spins, grips again, but sometimes it'll get so violent that the tire starts to leave the asphalt. And we're starting to hop, partially leave, right? And you'll get this juddering, hopping feeling.
And you can see that sometimes in the slow motion footage
Yes.
on MotoGP, and it's in like whatever they're catching, like 2,500 frames per second. And you can see this violent, the carcass flexing and deforming it.
Yeah,
Contact starts shrinking and contracting. And
there's a great clip. If you go look on YouTube, you can find it. It is Jack Miller last year on the KTM at Motegi. And he's braking into a corner. And Motegi has a lot of hard braking entries. And he's braking into a corner, and it's the same phenomenon, but it's effectively in reverse because he's braking. They're trying to brake with the rear tire, and it's so grippy, it won't just slide on the entrance. So it grips and skips and grips and skips. And it's getting so violent that you see the tail section bouncing and the tire leaving the ground. It's always amazing when they do those super slow-mos because you watch the carbon fiber flexing on the bodywork. That's how violent these can be.
And that's where the mass damper comes in, right? And mass dampers, from what I understand, they were originally put in skyscrapers to counteract the swaying.
They still are.
And so now we're taking it to this small little thing in the tail section of, like, the Ducati has it, KTM has it now, or do they not? They were playing with it. Honda has it.
They'll never tell you.
They'll never tell you.
They'll tell you. You can assume that they have it if you look at the tail section and it seems shockingly large.
Yeah, like the Ducati obviously has a mass damper. They developed it. They brought it to MotoGP. We know it's in the Ducati.
Correct. Yeah. Now, where this comes from is we're going to get a little nerdy here for a second. Every single thing, this chair, this table, your watch, everything has a natural frequency, which means it's the frequency in which it wants to vibrate at, right? Now, there's different modes of frequencies, so there's actually multiple, but you have these natural frequencies. If you give something an input at a similar frequency or the same one, rather than the amplitude of the motion damping out over time and calming down, it sometimes accelerates and gets worse and worse and worse, okay? So that's what these natural frequencies are. When people are designing a car, right, the engineers are measuring and trying to understand what are the natural frequencies of different components, but also of the assemblies. And how do we make sure that those do not line up with a frequency input from the tires or from the engine or transmission or what have you. Because if they line up, you wind up with really miserable conditions for the drivers and the people inside the vehicle. Okay.
We probably all had that Toyota.
Everyone's experienced
Nuances that would just,
and you go, oh, it's at 63 miles an hour. I get a terrible shudder in the wheel, and then at 70, it's gone.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're experiencing. The same thing happens to the motorcycle. And so the idea is they try to understand what are the natural frequencies that occur within this bike, and how do we react to that or compensate with these mass dampers. But if you think about it, all of these, think about the amount of adjustments that can happen to a vehicle that would adjust its natural frequency. Even things like, oh, we move the axle further back in the adjuster. We changed the swing arm pivot. We used a thicker axle instead of a thinner one, or wheel material. Like all of these things add up to whatever those natural frequencies are in the bike. So tons of things. And that's partially why these chatter and vibration issues are a nightmare to chase down, because it's so hard to guess what's going to cause it or when it's going to go away, because they're constantly fiddling with everything. So the mass damper idea is oftentimes the mass damper is tunable in the sense that I could have different springs supporting the mass. I could do preload on the springs. I could do different masses. I could put the mass in different places.
jingles straight up and down.
The sky's the limit, right? And you're even seeing now on the swing arm of the Ducati, Mark's had it in a couple races. There's a funny little cylinder right on the back. Again, I don't know what's inside that little cylinder.
But it shows you think in a little cylinder in fluid, it's a little damper.
Yeah, I would assume it's a little mass damper on the edge of the swing arm. It could be a sensor for all I know, but that's what I assume it is. But that's the idea with these mass dampers, is to try to tamp out whatever the weird vibration is, right?
So I did a video on this winter. And if you haven't watched it, go look at it. The thumbnail is an airplane and a motorcycle. And the argument is that it's easier to, the joke of the thumbnail was that it's easier to fly an airplane than it is to ride a motorcycle, because if I remember the numbers, I think an airplane has 8 degrees of freedom in movement and a motorcycle has 11, right? Because we have swing arms moving and we have there's a hinge in the middle of our vehicle that we have to think about as well. Like all these things, and the flex and the compression of the tires, that the physics of a motorcycle is extraordinarily complicated. The airplanes are easy by comparison when you look at how they move through time and space. And IMUs, ironically and interestingly, came from airplane technology, right? And that's why we're getting, again, all these incredible advancements to our humble little motorcycle, which is a bicycle with an engine, and yet it is so complicated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and they talk about that's why, like, if you're going to go take your street bike apart, you ran into this. If the IMU sits in a certain spot, in a certain orientation, it 100% cannot be relocated, right? Should not be relocated without some fairly dire consequences.
Yeah, it was like building it into a track bike there, where the IMU sits, and it sits at a very specific angle at a very specific location in the motorcycle. I'm like, if I could just shim it over a half an inch, it would make room for whatever the thing I was doing. Yep. I was like, I can't do that. Nope, I absolutely can't do that. I have to compromise this other thing because that IMU has to be exactly where that IMU is.
I want to go back to the vibration part for a second. I just remember one of my favorite stories about these vibrations. So years ago in Moto 2, they used to run Honda CBR 600 engines. Yep. So Honda was the supplier, and they sent these spec ones. And then it was an outfit in Europe who did the tuning for them. And I'm blanking on the name of who they are, but they would do a very mild tune.
Was it, oh my gosh, I just had the name. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. They'd send off a stock CBR engine. This other company would take it and then do whatever tuning they're going to do for racing. Now, it's spec series, so you're not trying to pump out every single horsepower you can out of this thing, but they would mildly tune it for racing. Well, in the first year of Moto 2, in testing, they were having all kinds of engine failures in testing. And they call Honda and they say, hey, the engine's not tuned that crazy. The thing, like, we can't keep these things together. They keep failing. The crank the connecting rods keep coming apart. What's the deal here? Honda sends out some Japanese engineers. And mind you, this is back in the day, right? We're talking, I want to say 08 or 09. So actually sooner than that, but somewhere in that era. So Japan Honda was still very Japan Honda, right? Anyway, they sent the engineers out. They went and saw what they were doing for about half a day, and then they flew back to report what they'd found. The guys are confused. You barely looked at the bikes. How are you already making the decision? Honda calls them and says, hey, you took the starter motor off the engine. Put the starter motor back on. And they said, what do you, no, it's a race bike. We don't run starter motors. They said, it's designed to have a starter motor, put it back on. And they found out that without that starter motor, which is engaged with the flywheel, is counteracting some frequency just right, that a Honda engine is a Honda engine and will run forever. And if you took it off and tried to tune it, the thing would come apart.
Wow. So it was a race bike with a starter button. How nice was that?
Well, I don't actually know if they kept the starter button, but they had to keep the mass on.
Well, that's so silly. Like, why not just use the button if you got the thing? Come on. Race bikes.
But anyway,
one of my favorite rules, we got to tape the headlights because because 50 years ago they were glass and they shattered, right? Like, we just stick to tradition.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories about dealing with vibration is that one. So
that's an incredible story.
Yeah. The other thing I want to talk about is this weekend they announced MotoGP now has a Harley-Davidson Bagger World Cup starting next year. So Harley-Davidson is that I went and checked this because I was concerned that it was like a spec series, but it's going to mimic the King of Baggers series that's in Moto America very closely. So it'll be Harleys and Indians, I believe. They are going to race in conjunction with the MotoGP weekend at COTA, and then I think 5 or 6 European rounds. So it's really just Europe and then America and Austin. And it's, I think, going to replicate the King of the Baggers series as closely as they can. It's a promotion event for Harley, and obviously Indian to some extent.
Or American racing. To get Americans into racing is probably what...
I think this is such an interesting thing to have come out. I want to hear your opinion on this.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. Number one is, okay, anything that can get people into racing, you can get people into racing, right? And I think about my dad, he's a Harley man. He has no interest in MotoGP. He still thinks his Harley's fast because he talks about Harley's one flat track. Well, it's the only bike competing. That's why. And years ago, they let Suzuki and the TLS and the Super Hog compete in the flat track racing, and it decimated. They had to change the rules. Nope, it has to be an air-cooled 2-valve motor. Right. So, but he got excited about racing when it was his motorcycle on the track. And I think that's cool, right? Like, it's no different than the build train race. You got the little Royal Enfields that are out there running around. I think that's fantastic. They're these janky little, air-cooled, I shouldn't call them janky. They are simple. They are old school motorcycles.
You were struggling.
I was trying to find, I like them. I'm not trying to say anything mean about them. It's just that there's nothing really modern about them other than they still make them. And I think it's really cool because I love, seeing my motorcycle on the tracks to the point that I will not buy a motorcycle that does not race MotoGP. So sorry, Suzuki and Kawasaki or BMW. I'm not going to buy a product that doesn't race MotoGP.
BMW.
I love seeing racing. It's just such a big part of me. But the bagger class, I have one really big issue with the bagger class. So how they have to have, the saddlebags have to be functioning, right? It's fine. But what bothers me is I really think they need to have all the radios on all of them, and they all need to be playing the same song. So you get a soundtrack, because nobody who rides a bagger ever doesn't have their Steppenwolf blaring out of those tinny speakers. And it really irritates me that they're not doing that in racing, because I think it just takes a huge chunk out of the appeal of the sport.
There should be blaring music. I like this.
There should be blaring music out of the speakers, right?
Really, really give everyone that bagger experience.
Yeah, totally. It's got to be like Born to Be Wild. It's got to be like that really typical. We got to lean in. And I think all of their leathers should look like they're wearing a leather vest with a patch on the back.
Their club or whatever.
Right? They should all have like their club. They should all have to have. It said like the race team needs to have like a biker club, Wild Hog.
Should they have the little like dangly?
Not the little safety thing. But maybe they could have fringe on their floorboards.
Or the suits. All the suits have to.
All the suits should have to have fringe. This is really offending everybody.
I like where we're going with this. Well, to be fair, I don't think this is. So I thought about this bagger thing a bit because even when Moto America first was going to do a bagger race, if you're a racing fan, it is hard not to roll your eyes at just the sheer idea
Until you watch it.
So I think even going in, I knew it was going to be exciting because anytime you can create a situation where the riders can ride at or beyond the limit of the bike, it's great to watch.
Oh, it's really entertaining.
Right?
Yeah.
You get slides, you get big saves, you get all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, it's fun to watch people who can ride beyond the equipment.
And these are giant motorcycles. They're like giant school buses. And to see what the thing is, now, they are nothing like the stock. They raise them. Like, we have a lot of friends that we know that are racing. They do contract racing out for these teams. How much money they put into these things to make that, they're way off the ground. Like
the ground clearance.
Yeah, the ground clearance and all the things they're doing to them to try to stabilize the swing arm, because it's a touring bike. It's not made for this good thing. But it's really, really incredible, like what we've learned about how these things are put together and how they're racing them. It's really exciting.
Where I've kind of come around to it, and I'm still, I would say I'd still rather watch a MotoGP.
Well, I would definitely rather watch somebody, but I'm taking it you're not that excited.
But that's who I am. And I was into this stuff before there was baggers. So I think, to your point, the baggers are not for the current racing fans. They're for the guys who we can't seem to convince to watch racing and think and get some excitement out of it. It's for a different audience, right? The other part about it is you think, well, why not watch something that is much more purposeful for racing to watch it go racing? And then I thought more about that. And if I go look at the car side,
NASCAR.
Well, yes, to some extent, right? If I think about cars and I say, well, what's the most purpose-built race car? Well, it's Formula cars, Formula One or Formula style cars. But that's not what I can go buy. It's not what you can go buy. And so now there are GT races, which are based on cars we can go buy. And these are cars with 4 seats and a trunk and the meant to, deal with.
You're seeing your car, what your car is capable of. Not really, but,
right? Yeah,
but kind of.
So I, in that sense, I get why the Bagger series is appealing. It's, I've seen an S1000RR go around a racetrack. I'm never going to buy and ride one of those torture racks on the street.
No.
Why would I?
No. Sport bikes are terrible on the street. If you're still riding a sport bike on the street, God be with you. Yes, well done. Like, it is not, you have to have a strong back to do that.
So I guess in that sense, I like the concept of the bagger racing in that, hey, I want to see the thing I own on track. But what I'd love to see, and this reminded me of our conversation last week, which was, you don't see telelevers racing. How come a GS isn't a bagger? Has a windshield.
Or a multistrada.
Has saddlebags.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no, I know they've got some rules about American V twins and blah, blah, blah. But
yeah, and that's stupid. They shouldn't do that.
I think now that this is an international race, I think we got to open this up.
Dude, I think that would make it really compelling to throw in GSs and multistradas. Throw in, like, if it gold wings.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that could be.
No, put some limits on them to make the racing a battle.
Yeah, well, and like for the first couple of years, like no one's going to know what's going on. You're going to who's going to be competitive and who's not.
But if Top Rack is going to go to a one-off BMW race in the Bagger Series on a GS, I'm tuning in.
Heck yeah. Are you like, love to see that.
Marquez on a Goldwing?
Oh my God. Well, he would be on a multistrada. He's a Ducati.
Well, now he would. That's true. That's true. Now he would.
But yeah, because it's like, like we talked about this a little bit too, riding the big lurpy derpy multistrada with the long travel suspension and it's up high and it's long. You got to carry a ton of lean angles. There's a lot of weight moving front and back. Telelever, maybe in that context would be, it could be, that's more interesting to me than the Harleys.
Before the show, we were talking about this and I said, well, let's talk about the bagger thing. And Dave was like, okay. I think the bagger thing is going to be fast if they'll open it up and not make it a Harley Indian thing, which is entertaining.
It's also a Yano thing. You're also like you're cutting a lot of people out. Other than it would be a multistrada or a BMW XR, obviously would decimate the field.
I don't think those are. Maybe they can run 17s. I don't know. Like, we'll come up with some reason why those.
Well, and like, because to me, like, I would rather see the GS out there. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
You like,
give me bikes, because that was the beauty and the inception of the original super bike racing. was these big tube bikes, you know, like tube frame bikes, big giant bars, flexy, twisty frames, and an absolute riot to go watch race, right? This in some ways is going back to that idea of let's go grab the thing that you buy that is not meant to go racing and let's go race it and see what happens. I would love to see some BMW GSs with saddlebags out there with their big sanders.
It has to be a two-cylinder, air-cooled potentially or air-oiled. No, I think the new GSs are liquid-cooled now. Or they're water head. Not air, maybe they're half. They're half and half. It's a liquid-cooled head, but an air-cooled whatever. Somebody's going to kill us. Someone's going to say, but yeah, I think, like give it a level playing field. It has to be like 1100 cc's or whatever it is, air-cooled two-cylinder and designed for touring. It comes, you buy it with bags. Right.
It's got to have bags. I like that idea because I think that's stupid looking.
So it's had a big windshield. Right?
Yeah.
And it has to have speakers so we can listen to that.
And maybe if the BMWs show up and they're too good, maybe the balance of power is a passenger.
So it's just like sidecar racing.
Well, but they're just
on light. Oh, the crashes would be really, really terrifying to watch.
I don't know why they don't let us be in charge of these things. I feel like we have all the answers, all the problems.
We could totally solve this. No, but I actually really do love this idea. Yeah. Do you remember years ago, BMW did the, it was called the Boxer Cup?
Yeah.
And they raced the S1000R? Not S1000S?
I don't know the model name, but
but it was, they had the Boxer. It had the Boxer motor, but it was their sporty one. It was kind of 916-esque. It had undertail exhaust. I almost bought one. I really liked the bike.
It had like I remember the engine was raised up in the frame and they had like chamfered heads.
Well, they chamfered on their own. But like, I think it was really exciting because the dudes were just like decking the heads on the asphalt. And if you lean too much, then it would volley the wheels off the ground. They would slide until the wheels caught again. And then they would keep going.
Yeah.
It was really unbelievably fun racing to watch.
It's the air-cooled heads that stick way out with the limit ground clearance. It's a really good argument for good body position.
Well, and Gucci could come in and just clean up.
Oh yeah,
right. Like if you bring it up or whatever it was, the Stelvio that they have their new Mondai. They have a sport touring one.
I'm never gonna know.
Yeah, I don't remember, but it has like the Gucci heads and it's they have more corner clearance. They could really.
So I think Liberty Media, you guys need to.
You're watching Liberty Media.
You've got a European contingency here for MotoGP. You've got to think about opening the doors a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be really cool.
I do. I also love the idea of American company Liberty Media buying MotoGP, and then the very first thing that they announce is like, baggers.
Yeah, we're here for the vet. We're bringing the American motorcycles back. But if it brings more Americans into watching racing, I am 100% for it. And I love seeing my motorcycle on the racetrack. I think for a lot of people, and let us know in the comments, they honestly prefer World Superbike because it is closer to their motorcycle in their garage. Well, even like they had to do the sticky headlights for a while. Are they still doing that? You have to have the headlights on.
I think they do.
Yeah.
I haven't paid. I feel like those at first were so silly because they all look like cartoons.
Yeah.
But now I think they're on there still, and I don't even think about them anymore.
Right. I still think they're kind of silly. Yeah. Like but I get where they're going, right? Yeah. They want, it's got to look like, it's like my motorcycle.
Totally. Yeah. I think it will have a much, much bigger draw than, and they still do it. Nobody talks about it, but they still do Moto E.
Yeah. Nobody watches Moto E. I watched a couple of the races. They're really short. It's not a big investment. It's not a big time investment. The racing's pretty close. But it's not many laps. I want to say it was like
8 batteries.
Yeah.
Don't last as long.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of a battery.
And it was weird, the silence of it. Even on television, it was.
Yeah. I mean, I do. I think the bagger thing is going to be, imagine ours is a little different because MotoGP, the bikes do sound unreal. They sound amazing with
G-Force, right? Greatest.
They're fantastic. Formula One is a great example of a series that if Formula One partnered with like a muscle car race series, that would be bad news for Formula One.
Yeah, I don't think Formula One is not very exciting racing to watch anymore. It's really, there's a parade and they're too long. It's complicated. Like honestly, the Brad Pitt movie was more fun than watching a Formula One race.
By far. The the strategy and the technology of Formula One is still interesting to me,
That's what I pay attention to it for.
but the racing is terribly dull. You know, but if they did an equal version of this and they had like a muscle car race series that came out with big ripping V8s, they're just loud and slow but sliding everywhere. That's the show of the weekend now. Like,
So,
I don't think we quite have that risk, but the Bagger thing could be interesting.
so I've always kind of looked at, everyone always says MotoGP is Formula One on motorcycles, and it kind of is, but it's also kind of not. I've always associated more with Le Mans cars, right? It still looks like a motorcycle. A Le Mans car still looks like a car. F1 it's space age. It's not the same. And like the changes we were talking about last week, that the aero, we have less space to work with the aero, and the bikes are gonna start looking like little F1 cars. That kind of bums me out because I still want it to kind of look like the thing that's in my garage. I don't want it an open wheel F1 car. They're just not in the real world, and they're not really relevant, or you can't really relate to them, like you can with a Le Mans car or the GT cars.
I mean, we'll see what happens with the new regulations, because it is going to rein in some of the aero, at least in terms of the overall scale of it. I still think we are going to wind up in a sense where it's like these little machines with two wheels that don't look a whole lot like bikes.
So they're gonna start looking like Tron motorcycles or something.
More and more. That's it?
I think that's it. That was a really good discussion.
Yeah.
Let us know what you thought. Click on the things, like, subscribe. Let us know. Available anywhere you get your podcast, but obviously if you're listening to it, you know that because you're here. Yeah, and we didn't introduce each other again.
This one's Dave. I'm Brian.
Right. He's the engineer. I'm the journalist. There you go. So, all right. Thanks so much for watching, guys.
Thanks, guys.